They thought his name would echo across draft night like a war drum. Shedeur Sanders, the chosen son of a football legend, the quarterback molded in fire and gold, the face of a new generation. The cameras were ready, the hashtags were waiting, the suits were ironed, and the dreams were loaded. Families gathered in front of televisions like worshipers before an altar, expecting to see destiny unfold in real time. But then, silence. Deafening, aching silence. Pick after pick, round after round. Nothing. No cheers, no phone call, no redemption. Just the slow, suffocating crawl of disbelief settling over a young man who had been told, repeatedly, relentlessly, that this was his moment, that the world would stop and rise when his name was called. But instead of a coronation, he sat through a slow-motion unraveling. The buzz turned to unease. The energy in the room dipped. Faces that once smiled began to crack. And Shedeur, once unshakable, sat still, like a statue watching the tide roll away with everything he thought was certain. What was supposed to be a beginning began to look like an ending. The headlines were supposed to scream top 10 pick. Instead, they whispered something else. Something cold, something cruel, something unforgettable. He fell. And not just a little, not a casual slide to the middle of the first, not a quiet tumble to the early second where Spin Masters could salvage the narrative. He kept falling, past the analysts' predictions, past the mock draft graphics, past the marketing plans, until even the broadcasters who had prepared glowing monologues about his rise had nothing left to say. The silence became louder than any highlight reel ever could, and somewhere in that silence something died. Maybe it was the illusion of invincibility, maybe it was the brand sheen, or maybe it was just the realization that no matter how famous your last name is, this league doesn't care. Because this fall, this crash, wasn't just about numbers or tape. It was about perception. It was about politics. It was about image. Shedeur Sanders didn't simply fall through the draft. He plummeted through the layers of an industry that claims to value talent but is governed by something colder: control. On the surface, he looked like a modern football prototype. The stats leaped off the page like a video game avatar. The poise under pressure, the accuracy, the winning drives, the leadership, the charisma. He was more than a player. He was a sensation. The name alone carried the kind of gravity that could move social media and merchandise. He was the engine behind the Colorado football phenomenon, turning a program into a cultural event. Every pass he threw wasn't just about yards. It was about brand, buzz, belief. But the NFL doesn't draft belief. It dissects tape. It nitpicks form. It finds the mole beneath the beauty mark. And when they turned the film on, they saw what the camera filters and charisma couldn't hide. He stood at just over 6 feet, not short, but not the towering presence teams prefer to see staring down defensive lines. He had decent weight, solid build, sure, but not the kind that made you say this guy can survive the AFC North in December. His arm, good, but not Josh Allen, not Mahomes. His mobility, functional, not fear-inducing. And in a league that now craves superhumans at quarterback, that was the first fracture. Worse still was the release. Slow. Hesitant. Measured to a fault. A quarterback's internal clock is sacred in the NFL. Snap, read, fire. But Shedeur held, waited, calculated, and while that worked in Boulder, where college defenses still make rookie mistakes, in the NFL, it gets you crushed. And it did. Last season, he took 42 sacks, the most in the FBS. That's not just a stat, that's a red flag flapping violently in the wind. Some pointed to the offensive line, but scouts are trained to look deeper. They saw the hesitation, the wait for perfection, the refusal to bail on a play that had already died. That's not patience. It's a death wish at the pro level. And the deeper they looked, the more they wondered, was this production truly elite, or was it packaged? Because Shedeur thrived in a short pass system. Quick outs, bubble screens, slants, safe routes. His average depth of target hovered around 8 yards. That's not dangerous. That's conservative. That's the quarterback equivalent of coloring inside the lines. And while that wins games in college, the NFL is not a league that rewards coloring books. It's a league of violence and velocity, where windows close faster than doubts. And those doubts began to grow. Jackson State was his first proving ground, a lower level of competition where he carved up defenses like a surgeon on autopilot. But when he transferred to Colorado and the lights got hotter, the weaknesses got harder to hide. Yes, there were moments of brilliance, deep throws that cut through the cold air, perfectly timed strikes that silenced crowds, drives that reminded people why his last name mattered. But there were also long, painful sequences of sacks, stalled drives, and a recurring question no one wanted to say out loud. Is he really ready? And still, some teams might have taken the leap, might have bet on pedigree, leadership, upside, but there was something else, something unmeasurable that haunted his evaluation. Shedeur didn't just carry a stat sheet into interviews, he carried the full weight of his last name. Deion Sanders, Coach Prime. His father, his mentor, his amplifier. And Deion didn't whisper. He declared that Shedeur was a first-round lock, that some teams weren't worthy, that this process was not a job interview but a coronation. He hinted at franchises they wouldn't play for. Stories surfaced of declined interviews, selective meetings, power plays. It was the kind of approach that shook NFL front offices to their core. Because this league doesn't like feeling challenged. It doesn't want to be told how things will go. It doesn't embrace quarterbacks who arrive with prepackaged legacies and media entourages. Confidence is admired, control is resented. And suddenly, Shedeur wasn't seen as a quarterback to mold. He was seen as a brand trying to write its own script. And so, the GMs blinked. One by one. Quietly, efficiently, like sharks swimming past a boat that smells like gasoline. They didn't want the smoke. They didn't want the politics. They didn't want the press conferences or the pre-written headlines. They didn't want a quarterback wrapped in gold chains and family loyalty, marching into their building with cameras trailing behind and legacy stitched into every word he spoke. They didn't want to gamble their reputations on a Sanders, not because he lacked talent, but because he came with too much story, too much spotlight, too much fire to control. They passed, and passed again. They passed until the draft became a graveyard of missed opportunity, until the memory of Shedeur's fall became etched into the very marrow of that weekend, until round 5, when the tension had long since curdled into silence, and the air around his name was no longer electric, but bitter, still, and heavy. What once was a dream, a destiny, had hardened into something darker, a scar, a reminder that even the brightest stars can be buried under layers of fear, pride, and doubt. But here's where the story pivots, sharp and sudden, like a knife turning in the gut of every executive who thought they understood who Shedeur Sanders was. Because if you think this ends with disappointment, if you think he fades into the forgotten bin of almosts and could-have beens, then you never really watched him. You never studied the way he carries himself, not with arrogance, but with certainty. You never listened to the way he speaks, not loud, but with force. Because this wasn't a fall, it was a fuse. And the league, in its panic to avoid the flame, unknowingly lit it. He didn't crumble, he didn't retreat, he didn't sulk on social media or vanish into luxury. He combusted, quietly, slowly, with the kind of heat that doesn't need to announce itself, the kind of heat that waits. He took every skipped pick, every whispered insult, every carefully worded analysis that labeled him average, not explosive, or not ready, and he locked it deep within himself, not to weep over, not to tweet about, but to weaponize. Because Shedeur Sanders is now something the NFL isn't ready for, a man with a memory and nothing to lose. Now, every snap he takes in training camp drips with venom. Every throw is lined with purpose, as if the football is a message folded into a fist. Every read he makes, every audible he calls, every glance he gives across the line of scrimmage. It's all coded in something invisible to the naked eye, but unmistakable to anyone who's ever been slighted and refused to forget it. This isn't just competition, it's retribution on a schedule. He's not just learning the offense, he's learning the names. Every team that passed, every decision maker who said he wasn't enough, every media personality who used his stats against him, every network that moved on when the cameras stopped rolling. He's not chasing fame, he's not trying to go viral, he's building something darker, more focused, more relentless. He's trying to make them regret. And here's the terrifying truth. He's going to, because now the swagger has grown teeth. The branding has developed a razor's edge. The patience, once seen as hesitation, now hums like a storm cloud about to burst. This isn't the Shedeur Sanders who posed for magazine covers or strutted down the sideline with the glint of prime time in his eye. This is a Shedeur who has felt humiliation wrap around his throat and squeeze, and has learned how to breathe through the pressure. This is a Shedeur who has tasted the bitterness of doubt and decided to use it like fuel. Not for one Sunday, not for one season, but for a career. He didn't enter the league like a king, he came in like a shadow. Quiet, overlooked, underrated, but shadows grow in silence. They stretch when no one's watching. They gather in corners and wait. And when they rise, they eclipse everything.